Alright guys, welcome back. In this lecture we're going to be unwrapping the space behind his mouth and his eyes, also these hair thingies and the legs, all in this one lecture. There's a lot to do, but before we get started I want to point out that I deleted some screens here, so if you download this file and you see some missing screens, that's what happened. I also removed the material off of the alien's body. I left all the materials on the eyelids and stuff because I want to give you a sense of practice removing materials before you start putting textures on your models. It's a good idea to go in here and remove them because you cannot mix Blender render materials with Cycles render materials. When you go and actually put your textures on this thing, you're going to use Cycles render because it's compatible with Unity. So the first step is to go in here and delete all these materials. I'm saving them for you so that you can remember to do it yourself, okay? But I did remove them off of here, and the reason why, if you go into the UV editing window and select the geometry that we have not edited yet, you'll notice that I minimized the UV information into one solid little point, and I want to point out one last time that the UV information is still there, but it's all reduced to a scale of 0. If I grab this and move it out here in the black checkerboard, you'll see that he changes to the color black. So whatever pixel of color that geometry happens to be on is going to be the color that he's displayed in, okay? So keep that in mind. If you want him to be white, put him in a white area. Also, if you change the color grid, you'll notice that he changes color depending on, it's the same exact thing. So it all depends on what image you have shown here, what color he's going to be. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is just throw it into one of these white areas here, and I'm going to call it a day. I'm going to unselect everything and fly into his mouth. All we want to do is select all the geometry inside of his mouth and unwrap it. Fortunately, we already know how to do this. If you use the edge selection tool and select the ring around his lip here, let's look at this from the outside for a second. That's this part right here. Select that loop and mark it as a seam. Now we can link select everything. You'll notice that it selects all of the link geometry, but remember we can easily delimit by seam, and then that will break it at that point. So now we have the inside of the mouth selected. Very quick, very easy. All we need to do now is run over to the UV editing window and unwrap this. And let's go back to the default and take a look at this with the texture mode on. As you can see, there's now a checkerboard pattern inside of his mouth. And because you can't really see all of it at once, it doesn't really need to be perfect. As a matter of fact, let's go back over here again and take a look at just what it looks like. I'm going to go and hide everything else but this. And it's hard to see because backface culling is turned off. So I'm going to go turn that on. This is off in the UV editing window, by the way. It should be on. So I'm going to turn that on. You can see now what that looks like inside. And the checkerboard pattern looks pretty good, actually. It doesn't really matter what the checkerboard pattern looks like out here because you're never really going to see this from the outside. Okay, we're ready to move on. So I'm going to unhide everything. And what we need to do is temporarily hide his eyeballs and the eyelids. So let's go back to object mode and select those. And just hit H for hide. Now I can go back into edit mode on the alien and fly into those eyes and do the same exact thing that I just did for the mouth, but for the eyes this time. So I'm going to select one of these edges. I'm not sure which one yet, but probably something like this. And I'm going to fine tune this a little bit. Actually, I think I want this edge and this edge maybe. Yeah, I think I want those edges right there. Mark them as seams. Select linked And notice that it's still on delimit by seam, so we have all of the interior behind the eyes. I noticed this, I did a little practice run on this, and I discovered that there's a section right here of double faces. So what I'm going to do is remove doubles. It took me a while to actually figure out this. There was a problem at one point. I just want to point this out right now, and I'll show you where I discovered the problem as I'm working. So I'm just going to remove doubles, and you'll see that 4 vertices were removed. Now, you could delete them now or later. I think maybe it might be better for me to show you later. So I'm going to undo that so you can see those doubles are back in place. Let's hide everything but this. And I guess what I'll do is show you how I ran into this problem. Unwrap. And this is how I noticed it right here. You see these faces right here? Didn't make any sense. We have this solid geometry selected here. It should be one island, but there's actually 3 islands here. So that was a little confusing to me. That's when I selected these faces and I discovered that they were right here. You can see the little bit darker orange in this area. And then I went and removed doubles, and they went away. This went away, and everything was cool after that. So what's going on here is it's severely stretched on this side and not really that bad on this side. What happens if I unwrap this again? Doesn't really fix it. It changed it a little bit because I've changed the geometry since the last time I unwrapped, but it still doesn't fix that problem. You see there's a lot of really severe stretching going on over here. So what I want to do is create a relief cut, but the big question is where? You might be tempted to make your relief cut back here, but that's probably not the best place. I discovered that a simple cut right here worked pretty good. So think of this like a pair of shorts or breeches or whatever, and this is the inseam inside the crotch of the shorts. That's where we're putting our relief cut. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that as a seam, select all, and unwrap. So it unwrapped, still a little bit of stretching, but the important thing is the parts that you're actually going to see look fine. If I flew inside of this thing and looked around, you'll see some pretty bad stretching in other areas, but we're not going to focus on any of that. I think the problem is solved now. So let's go back and unhide everything and move on. So that actually looks pretty good. So now let's separate these hair thingies from the head. And I don't really know, I don't know the exact formula, so it's really just trial and error. But it seems like kind of treating this like a tree and branches is kind of the technique that I'm going for here. I want to make sure it's the same on both sides. I think this is going to work for me. Okay, so something like that. Let's go ahead and mark those as seams. We got to think about the top too. So there's this area here on top that's a little bit different than the rest of it. I'm going to go and isolate that. Mark that as a seam. Notice too that every time I switch to a different piece, I zoom in on it. It makes it easier to rotate around it. So for example, this piece over here, I selected a little piece of it, hit the period on the numeric keypad, and helps you center in on it. Makes it a lot easier to rotate around. That looks pretty good. Go ahead and mark that. We got this one over here. And mark that. Should be 4 now. The only problem is I actually want to unmark or clear at least one edge around that loop so that it will fold over and keep all of these pieces together. So I'm just going to select, as long as it folds out onto an open quad like this. So here's a quad, then it'll be ideal. So find a couple of pieces like that. There we go. And I'm going to clear those seams. Now I can link select inside of these hair thingies. And because there's a fold separating those, it goes through that shape. Let's go over to the UV editing window and unwrap this. Okay, one thing I forgot to do was create a seam down the middle. So I'm going to hide everything other than this. And we're going to go ahead and create those seams. And I think what I'm going to do is mark these center pieces like this. So they're all coming out from the center like that. I don't know why, but it seems to make sense to me. Make sure that they all go up to the red line. They do. I'm going to go ahead and mark those as a seam. Select all and unwrap. That looks a lot better. Actually looks pretty good now. So I'm going to go with that. Let's unhide and jump down to the legs. So we're going to be focusing on these. What we want to do now is separate the legs from the body with a seam. So I'm thinking somewhere around here. Go ahead and mark that as a seam. I'm going to fly into the ankles and do basically the same thing down here. This time I'm going to select a loop on each side and zoom in on that with a period on the numeric keypad. And it looks like it was a full loop, so I didn't have to worry about it. I don't think I actually want to use that. Maybe I want to go this route instead. I'm not really sure. Let me see what this looks like first. Yeah, I'm going to go with that route instead. So let's go ahead and mark that as a seam. And we're going to select linked and hide everything else. We need to make some relief cuts. I'm going to just pick a couple of random lines. Looks like they have a problem down here. So probably this line because it continues straight down like that. Let's go grab the same line on the other side. Okay, now because I hid all the other geometry, it doesn't loop all the way up around the head and everything, which is kind of smart, I guess. So let's go ahead and mark that as a seam. I'll show you what I mean in just a second. If I go and unhide this, and I select that same loop, see how it goes all the way up the whole body, up over the hair and everything? But by selecting linked and hiding everything else, when I selected that loop, obviously it doesn't go up through there because it's hidden. So that's kind of a cool way to select parts of geometry without, grabbing more than what you need. Let's go ahead and select all of this and unwrap it. We got a bit of stretching going on here, but I might be able to live with this. Let's try, see what we got, angle based here, and we got conformal. So which one looks better? Kind of like angle based better. So I'm going to go with that. And that's about all we have time for in this lecture. If you haven't already done that, catch up and try doing all that stuff. And if you want to be a step ahead, we're going to be doing the arms and the rest of the body and the feet in the next lecture. So you know what to do. Good luck. I'll see you in the next lecture.